Sometimes the real turning point doesn't show up loudly. It slips in gently, piece by piece, before anyone realizes what's happening. A phone call, a cry for help, and before anyone realizes it, a life is already changing direction. Today, I'll tell you a story that began with kindness and ended in a way no one could have imagined. If you think you know what danger looks like, this story might surprise you. Christie Marceau was awakened by the sharp ringing of the phone. The girl had been sleeping in her room. It was 10 a.m. on Tuesday, September 6, 2011, and the 18-year-old student of Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand had no need to get up early. The phone stopped ringing before Christie picked up, but then, a few seconds later, it rang again. The girl answered. A male voice on the other end asked to speak to Christie. "This is Christie," she said. It turned out the caller was her acquaintance, Akshay Chand. Until recently, the two of them had worked at a local supermarket. They weren't friends, but they occasionally talked at work and outside of it, exchanging messages on Facebook. They lived only a few blocks apart, and Akshay had visited Christie's home several times. He often needed someone to talk to because of his personal problems. Kind and empathetic, Christie was always ready to listen. She knew Akshay had been going through a hard time lately, but she could never have imagined what he would say next. Her heart sank when he said, "I dissolved 40 pills in a drink, and if you don't come to my house within 10 minutes, I'll drink it." Without a moment's hesitation, Christie rushed to help Akshay. Christie was in such a rush after Akshay's call that she barely had time to get dressed. She quickly pulled on sweatpants and a jumper over the clothes she had slept in, grabbed her keys and mobile phone, jumped into her car and drove about a kilometer to Akshay's house. For Christie, ignoring a cry for help was unthinkable. She always tried to support those who had a harder time in life. Unlike sociable Christie, Akshay Chand didn't have many friends. Everyone noted his remarkable intelligence, but he found it difficult to interact with others, especially girls. When fate brought them together working at the local supermarket, Akshay began sharing his inner struggles with her. Christie felt sorry for him, but in June 2011 she started a new job and saw Akshay far less often. By the time he called her on September 6th, it had been quite a while since they had last seen each other. Christie needed only 2 minutes to reach the apartment building where the young man lived with his mother and younger sister. She parked the car, ran up the steps, and knocked on the door. Akshay let her inside. Christie followed him through the entrance, which he locked behind them. No one else was home. Akshay's mother was at work, and his 16-year-old sister was at school. Sitting down in a chair across from him, Christie noticed a bit of white powder on the table. It looked as if someone had crushed pills. Clearly, Chand had not lied about the glass with the medication. Christie asked him where the drink was. "Do you think I'm that stupid?" he replied. "Of course I hid it because I knew you would find it." Worried, the girl tried to persuade Akshay to seek professional help. Her words upset Chand. From his point of view, Christie hadn't helped him cope with his depression after she left the supermarket job. Christie explained that she was torn between her university classes and her new job. But Chand said she could have spared 5 minutes to talk to him on Facebook, and that would have been enough. Christie felt increasingly uneasy. The more he blamed her, the more she tried to explain that she couldn't help him. This made Akshay furious. He jumped up from the chair and reached into his pocket for a kitchen knife. The knife was long and very sharp. Akshay gripped the handle tightly, waving it in front of Christie. "Here's what we're going to do," he said. "If you scream, I'll stab you." Christie began to whimper, and in response, Chand ordered her to be quiet and calm down. She was still holding her mobile phone and was trying to think of a way to send a message to a friend asking for help. But Chand noticed the phone and demanded she hand it over. Christie clutched it tightly as if it were her only connection to the outside world. Unable to take the phone from her by force, Chand again threatened to use the knife. After finally taking the phone from her, Chand suddenly started talking. He said he had big plans for the day. He had decided to scare her, to take revenge on her for not supporting him during the hardest period of his life, and then finally end everything at once. Then he demanded that Christie take off her jumper and give it to him. After searching it, he demanded her blue top. The girl refused, but he predictably threatened her with the knife. Christie obeyed. Then he told her to stand up and prove she wasn't hiding anything in her pants. She emptied her pockets, but that wasn't enough for him. He wanted her to take off the sweatpants she was wearing. Christie refused and cried even harder. But realizing she had no choice, she undressed until she was left only in her underwear. Chand crumpled her clothes into a pile, sat back down in the chair, and once again started talking about various things. He rambled about how people like Christie made others suffer. He accused her of coming to him only when it was already too late. In total, more than half an hour had passed since Christie arrived. Terrified, she asked him if he was planning to kill her. Chand reminded her of his plans for the day, to scare her, take revenge, and drink the mixture he had prepared. He hadn't previously explained how he planned to take revenge, but now he was ready to tell her. Akshay Chand wanted to assault Christie. Hearing this, the girl broke down crying, which made Chand ask her to calm down. Then, suddenly, and for no clear reason, he changed his mind. He gave Christie back her clothes, her phone, and told her she could leave. Still terrified, Christie couldn't believe the sudden shift in his mood. What if he planned to stab her in the back and catch her off guard when she turned away? She shared her fear with Chand, which made him lower the knife. "I'm letting you go, but you should know that as soon as you leave, I'm going to drink the mixture," he said. Christie once again tried to convince him to abandon the idea. Despite everything he had put her through, her nature simply wouldn't allow her to walk away after hearing that. But Chand insisted. Too frightened to stay any longer, Christie turned and ran out of the apartment. She hurried down the stairs toward her car. Passers-by walked by, completely unaware of what had just happened to her. Christie wanted to ask someone for help, but she knew she wouldn't feel safe until she was home. Getting into her car, she locked the doors, started the engine, and drove home. From Christie's parents' point of view, Brian and Christie Marceau, she was their little miracle. After the birth of their first child, a girl named Heather, Christie and Brian tried to have another baby. But 6 years passed before Christie was born. By 2011, the very close-knit family lived far apart. Heather had moved out several years earlier, and Brian was working in Australia. Christie was planning to move to Australia soon as well, to be closer to her husband. Christie was also happy about the idea. She was finishing her first year at Auckland University of Technology in New Zealand, where she studied event management, and she could continue her studies in Australia. By the age of 30, she dreamed of starting her own event planning company. For the time being, she was still living in her childhood home in the suburb of Hillcrest. On the morning of the attack on Christie, Christie was at work when, around 11:30 a.m., her phone rang. It was her mother, Shirley, who lived with Christie and Christie in the same house. Christie answered. In the background, she heard Christie's hysterical crying. Then she heard her mother's voice saying she should come home immediately because Christie had been attacked. Christie was home within 15 minutes. Seeing her mother, Christie threw her arms around her and didn't want to let go. Still trembling and crying, she told her what Akshay Chand had done. Christie barely knew Akshay, but she remembered one occasion when, after driving Brian to the airport, she and Christie returned home to find him waiting on their doorstep. Akshay and Christie chatted a little. Christie assured her mother that he just needed someone to talk to, but Christie instantly disliked him. He gave her a strange, unsettling feeling, and she asked her daughter not to talk to him anymore. But Christie was convinced there was nothing to worry about, and Christie never heard about Akshay again until that day. Shocked by what her daughter told her, Christie immediately drove Christie to the police. At the station, Christie repeated her account of the attack. She didn't know why Akshay had changed his mind and let her go, but she was certain this wasn't the end, that he would attack her again because, in reality, he had been stalking her for some time. She hadn't told her parents that she had found him sitting on the steps of their house more than once. Once, he had left her a note in the mailbox, confessing his love and thanking her for the support he so desperately needed. Chand had also insisted that Christie accept a large sum of money as a gift. She took it but never spent it, assuming he would eventually demand it back. And that is exactly what happened just a few days later. When she left her job at the supermarket, Chand quit the same day, saying he had no reason to stay there without her. After that, their communication faded, and it became increasingly clear that Akshay had built up a lot of resentment toward Christie, whom he believed had abandoned him. The thought of him being out there, free, terrified her, and the police understood the danger she was in. Akshay Chand was immediately taken into custody. Akshay confessed to everything and stated that the drink he had threatened to consume contained multivitamins. although he genuinely believed that taken in large quantities, they were toxic. At the station, he calmly explained that his motive had been revenge. Chand was angry at Christie because she hadn't helped him with his depression, and he openly stated that he still dreamed of revenge. The police were extremely concerned about his behavior. It was a huge leap from someone who had never been in trouble with the law to a man now charged with kidnapping, threatening to cause grievous bodily harm, and assault with intent to sexually violate. Since he was still furious with Christie, the detectives knew without a doubt that Chand needed to remain in custody until his court appearance. They prepared a document outlining the reasons why Chand should under no circumstances be granted bail, emphasizing that this was Christie's wish as well, since she was terrified of him. They also highlighted the fact that their homes were within walking distance of each other, meaning he could show up at her house within minutes if he wished. 3 days after the attack, Akshay appeared in court. His lawyer argued that her client should be released on bail because he was only 18 years old. Under the law at the time, anyone older than 17 but younger than 20 had to be granted bail if they had no prior convictions, and Chand had never even been arrested before. The lawyer promised that he would take antidepressants and that, if released on bail, his family would watch over him. However, the judge believed that someone who had not backed down for even a moment from the idea of finishing what he had started could not be safely released. Despite the law, the only circumstance under which she would have allowed him to go free was if he agreed to be admitted to a psychiatric hospital, which was highly unlikely. So the judge decided to postpone the bail decision and required that Akshay be evaluated by a psychiatrist. All this time, Christie continued to suffer. Her father was not due to return from Australia for another week, and she persuaded her family not to tell him what had happened so he could continue working without worry. At first, she was afraid not only to use public transport, but even to sleep in her own room. If she heard any noise at night, she immediately asked her family to check what it was. What she feared most was that Akshay would be released and would attack her family, or fixate on another innocent girl. By early November, life slowly began to improve. Chand was scheduled to appear in court on Wednesday, November 9th, and in 2 months, Christie and her family would already be living in Australia. The move, which was originally supposed to mark the beginning of an exciting new chapter in their lives, had now become a vital necessity. Tracy woke up at 6:30 a.m. on the morning of November 7th and began getting ready for work. She let the dogs outside, prepared breakfast, and took a shower. She was just about to get dressed when she heard a knock at the door. It was still early, around 7 a.m., but Tracy wasn't surprised. Christie loved shopping online, and her orders usually arrived in the morning. Since Christie was still asleep, catching up on rest before her late shift, Tracy went to open the door herself. A young man was standing on the porch. Tracy didn't recognize him at first, then she understood. It was Akshay Chand. He was holding a knife. Paralyzed with fear, Tracy watched as Chand forced his way into the house. She screamed as loudly as she could, hoping Christie would hear her, realize something terrible was happening and run. Or maybe the neighbors would hear and call for help. Still threatening Tracy with the knife, Chand asked who else was in the house. Tracy said her husband was home. This wasn't true. He had already returned to Australia. He had wanted to leave his job, but the police had convinced him that his family would be safe. Yet Chand seemed to know he wasn't there, which made Tracy think he had been watching them for some time. Suddenly, Christie appeared on the stairs near Tracy and Chand, barefoot and still wearing her sleep clothes. Her mother's scream had woken her, and she came upstairs to see what was happening. Seeing Chand, Christie screamed. Frozen with fear, she stood at the top of the staircase, unable to move. Chand continued pointing the knife at Tracy as he approached Christie. Then he kicked the girl in the chest, sending her tumbling down the stairs. Christie fell, got to her feet, and ran down the remaining steps, but in her panic she slipped and fell again. She got up and ran through her grandmother's room into the garden. Chand chased after her. Meanwhile, Tracy was calling the police. Considering what Chand had done last time, she thought he only wanted to scare Christie again. She was sure Christie would manage to reach the door of her grandmother's room and lock it so he couldn't get to her. The police knew the case. They would arrive in minutes and arrest Chand. Tracy dialed emergency services, but before she could give the address, she heard a piercing scream. It was Christie. Tracy dropped the phone and ran downstairs. Christie was lying on the garden porch, a pool of blood spreading beneath her. Chand stood nearby. Tracy rushed to her daughter and held her. She couldn't see any wounds, but Christie couldn't move. She looked like she was struggling to breathe. Tracy kept telling her daughter she loved her and begged her to hold on because help was on the way. Tracy thought Christie was trying to say something. Looking into her eyes, Tracy saw the life leave them. Christie was gone. Chand just stood there. When Tracy looked at him, she saw he was still holding the knife. Its blade was bent at a 90-degree angle. Akshay himself was covered in blood. Not caring that he might attack her next, Tracy screamed that he had killed Christie. In a voice completely devoid of emotion, he answered, "I'm glad." The police arrived less than 10 minutes after the attack began. Chand was still standing in the backyard, listening to music on an iPad. The broken knife lay on the ground. An officer asked what he was doing there. Chand answered, "Retribution." Another officer noticed his hands shaking and asked why. He replied, "It's not easy to kill someone, is it?" The Marceau family had feared something like this might happen ever since Akshay was released on bail a month earlier. Initially, the judge had denied him release, citing the need to gather additional information about the case and about Akshay's mental health. But because he fell under the bail law, his lawyer quickly filed a second petition for release. Chand wrote a letter to the new judge, David McNaughton, expressing a remorse for the attack on Christie. He wrote that he was incredibly sorry for what he had made her go through and that, if given the chance, he would apologize to her and her family. Christie also wrote a letter to the judge, begging him not to release Akshay. She believed that, with nothing to lose, he would try to attack her again. On October 5th, despite reading Christie's letter and knowing that the police also considered it safest to keep him in custody, the judge granted Chand bail. He was allowed to return to a house located just 350 meters, as the crow flies, from Christie's home. The police were deeply disappointed but reassured the Marceau family that they would protect them. Officers promised to check on Chand at different times of the day to make sure he was home. All officers patrolling the area were informed about the case. Over the 32 days he was free, the police visited Chand's house 23 times, and each time he was indeed at home. What makes this story so gripping is how close everything came to changing in unexpected ways. People tried to do the right thing, and others acted with the best intentions, yet the situation didn't simply resolve itself. Christie kept moving forward, trying to reclaim some normalcy. But some challenges quietly continued in the background, waiting for the right moment. And when that moment comes, everything can change again. Despite the police assurances, Christie's fears grew, and after 32 days, he appeared at her doorstep with a knife. Forensics examining the scene of her death found the knife Chand used, which he had struck her with 10 to 15 times before it bent at a 90-degree angle and became useless. He attacked her from behind, hitting her hard on the back of the head. She fell to the floor where Chand continued to strike her on the back. One of the blows was so severe that Christie almost felt nothing afterward. At the station, Chand was surprisingly calm and immediately confessed to everything. Despite having let Christie go once, his desire for revenge never left him, and in prison he had begun plotting her murder. Knowing that he would need to be out of custody to carry it out, the young man feigned remorse, writing a pitiful letter to the judge. Once free, he wasted no time, carefully waiting and knowing that the police would be protecting Christie and her family. Although the judge believed that Akshay's family would watch over him all day, his mother worked long hours, and his sister was far too young for such a responsibility, and even she was afraid of him. All his mother could do was keep the kitchen knives out of reach, but Chand knew her plan and had hidden one of them. On November 7th, he woke up at 6:30 a.m., fully aware that the day had come. In just 2 days, he was scheduled to appear in court, and Christie likely believed she was safe. Investigators were certain that Akshay would be found guilty on all charges, as he had confessed to everything. They were surprised, however, when he chose to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. He was examined by several experts, one appointed by his lawyers and 2 by the prosecution. He told them that for some time he had been hearing a female voice, especially persistent in the mornings. Akshay claimed that the voice had commanded him to kill Christie and wished harm upon her mother. While at first he could resist the voice's pressure, he eventually gave in. After sessions with psychiatrists and starting medication, he did not express remorse for the murder, but he acknowledged that he would have to live with the knowledge of what he had done. Christie's parents found it incredibly difficult to accept these medical conclusions. Tracy, in particular, struggled. She regretted opening the door to the murderer and could not forget Christie's final moments. "All I see, all I will ever see, is my daughter lying on my lap, gasping for air, covered in blood, dying for some ridiculous reason. He just stood there and watched. He didn't even try to run away. What kind of person does that?" she cried. She demanded punishment for Akshay, but the psychiatrist explained that the symptoms previously attributed to depression could now be explained by schizophrenia, especially since the treatment of depression with medication often makes schizophrenic symptoms more apparent. During the first attack, his illness was at an early stage, and he realized that assaulting Christie would be wrong, so he let her go. During the second attack, he knew what he was doing, but his illness prevented him from understanding that it was morally unacceptable. Akshay could not be tried for murder, but he was found guilty of kidnapping and attempted sexual assault. However, he will still serve his sentence in a psychiatric facility. He will only be released if he no longer poses a danger to the public, though his chances of recovery are extremely low. The Marceau family moved to Adelaide, Australia, but they refused to let Christie's murder become just another crime statistic. If Akshay had not been released on bail after his first offense, Christie would have moved to Australia and lived happily. Consequently, they began a campaign to change bail laws. Thanks in part to their efforts, since 2013 defendants must now prove that they do not pose a threat to the public, rather than the police having to prove the opposite, as had been the case before. Sometimes a single flaw in the law can cost someone their life. Christie Marceau is gone, but her family turned their grief into change, now protects others. Still, one question lingers: how many tragedies could we prevent if we recognized danger before it struck? This has been Nero Wolf. Take care of the people you love. And never ignore the darkness even when it knocks softly.